Thank you for being here. Hi, everyone. Welcome in. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Just want to take time to let people trickle in. And if you wouldn't mind, if you would like to, you can introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from today. We'd love to hear. Hello, Ty. Thank you for being here. Hi, Pam. Hi, Delilah. Hi, Jen. Hi, Rick. Thanks for coming. Hi, Alice. Hi, Joe. Welcome in. Hi, Amanda. Some people from down south here. Hi, Donna. Hi, Dawn. Thanks for joining us today. Hi, Lindsay. Hi, Sherry. Welcome in, everyone. Hi, Janet. Hi, Amelia. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Hi, Kayla. Take just a minute or two more to let more people come in. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're excited to hear Robin speak today. Hi, Courtney. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, David. Thanks for joining us. And Danielle and Brenda. All right, let's go ahead and get started today. Thank you all for being here. Of course, I'm Shelby. I'm the event coordinator here at Voice, and I'm so glad you all decided to join us today to hear Robin Pendleton from the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services talk with us about the topic of abuse and how to identify those signs and protect your loved ones. Of course, today we have with us Robin Pendleton from the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. He's the Senior Staff Development Training Technician and has worked with the state of Missouri for over 10 years and is currently with the Department of Health and Senior Services. So thank you for being here today, Robin. Just want to take a minute to thank our education sponsors. We have Eamon, Gantner, and Capriano, Enterprise Bank and Trust, Everspring Pharmacy, the FDC Foundation, Quinn Estate and Elder Law, and Infinium Pharmacy. Thank you all for your support. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end my screen sharing so that Robin can start.
Thank you, Shelby. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Shelby said, I do work for the Department of Health and Senior Services. I will correct one thing, and she didn't get it wrong. Just we'll add some years to it. I'm a few days shy of 20 years with the state of Missouri at this point. So it's quite the milestone. Let me ask some questions because I want this training to be as interactive as possible. So I'll be watching the chat box. We also have the Q&A, so you can use either or, and I'll be watching that. And Shelby's going to be watching me. So if I miss anything, she'll be sure to pipe in and let me know that I missed your question. But let's make this as interactive and as much for you as we possibly can. How many of you guys are familiar with NAPSA? You can just put a simple me, I am, however you want to put it. The reason I ask that is because this presentation was put together for the most part by the NAPSA Education Committee. And NAPSA is the National Adult Protective Services Association. I chair the Curriculum Development Committee for NAPSA. And so kind of giving props to the committee and all the people who have put all the work into this presentation. Here's the first few slides. It has been altered to fit Missouri. So I believe everybody in here is from Missouri. And if not, there may be a few things that may be a little bit different from your state. And that could be part of this right here with who is a client. Here in Missouri, an APS client are Missourians who are 60 and older or 18 to 59 with a mental or physical disability who are unable to protect their own interests or perform or obtain services to meet their needs. How many of you have made a hotline before? Have any of you used our services in the past? I see Chin says yes. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put in a couple things here, and I'm going to go ahead and give you your first option to see what our hotline number is and another way to actually make a report as well. So in Missouri, there's a whole lot of people who are mandated reporters. I would venture to guess that the majority of you on this training today are mandated reporters. If you're ever not sure, or if someone says, I don't know if my position falls into that category of being mandated, you can go to this website here, this eversafe.com for mandated reporting, and you can put in your position and it'll let you know if you are a mandated reporter for your state or not. We also have some stats in here that come from Namers. Namers is just a stats gathering area for us. We get a lot of data from them. And one of the first ones I'm going to share with you is that for every one case of abuse that comes to light, there's at least 23 that don't. And so part of this presentation today is to help raise that awareness so that you'll know more about how to protect the people that you have in your lives, both professionally and personally, and how to make those reports so that other people can get involved and help protect the people in our communities. So if you've never made a report and you're interested in how to do that, I'll have this up again later on in the slides, but our 800 number is there, as well as if you're a mandated reporter, we do encourage you to go to our website, health.mo.gov/abuse, and you can use our online reporting tool. And you can use that anytime, day or night, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If you are here with us and you're from another state, or you have people that you help from other states and you don't know who to call or who to contact, you can go to napsanow.org, and there'll be a site there that you can go to if you can follow this link here, and it'll give you all the information for all the different states. Some states run off of a county based, so it'll give you all the counties that they have so that you can get help for the people that are in your areas or for the loved ones that you have in your life. All right, so now to talk about what abuse is here for us in Missouri. Our statute defines it as the infliction of physical, sexual, or emotional injury or harm, including financial exploitation by any person, form, or corporation, and bullying. That word bullying throws people off sometimes. In the chat box, if you would, just throw me in some examples of bullying. What do you consider it to be? And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and point out that throughout this presentation, we are going to talk about the different types: the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, neglect, the isolation, abandonment, financial exploitation, sexual abuse, and self-neglect. I see it's a form of coercion. Yeah, absolutely can be. Let me ask this question to go along with that as you're putting your stuff in there. Do we prosecute bullying for adults? Pressuring, gaslighting, humiliation, yeah, Anna, absolutely. Making them feel intimidated in any way, absolutely. and you would say yes to the prosecution. Okay. Money taken unwillingly, unknowingly. Sure. Well, the reason I asked about the prosecution part and asked for what your ideas behind bullying is, the rest of that definition, if I go back, seems fairly straightforward to people most of the time, looking at the physical, the sexual, the emotional, and stuff like that. But bullying often comes across as a very subjective word. What I might consider to be, we're just having a good time and you're just kidding with me and joking, might be somebody else's version of bullying. So it's really hard to look at that and say, here's something that we can prosecute exactly as it is. So rather, if you see things that we consider to be bullying, and you guys are 100% correct in what you put in the chat box, and it does depend case by case, I want you to think about, how does this form of bullying that you see affect that person individually? Because what we will look for is, we will look at that harassment. We'll look at those harassment charges for that, and we'll look at that abuse that comes with that as well. So there are ways to prosecute it. It just won't be prosecuted straight up as bullying, just as it is. So we look at how we look at this will go through the courts. So what's the emotional and the physical harm that's being caused? What's the harassment that's there? Those are the things to be reported. And the good news is, when you guys make those reports, the people that you're going to talk to on the phone, or when you do that online report, somebody's going to reach back out to you and follow up with some more questions so that they can best get our investigators out there to see what's really going on and what we can do to help. Let's talk about some of these effects of A&E. So abuse, neglect, and exploitation is often referred to as A&E, if you haven't heard that. Some of these are pretty obvious, like the welts, the wounds, the injuries, things that you can very quickly and easily see. But there's a lot of things that don't always come across as this person is being abused, neglected, or exploited. Sometimes we'll see people who have physical pain and soreness. How many of your clientele have physical pain and soreness on a daily basis, even without any kind of abuse or neglect? How many of them have nutrition and hydration issues, or have susceptibility to new illnesses? They already have a lot of these things going on. And so it becomes very difficult when you see things that are common, when it may be abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and it's not the regular stuff that's happening. So as we go through this, we'll talk about some of those less common things to look for. And anytime that you are concerned or you're worried about somebody who's being abused or neglected, make that report. Make that report to us and let us figure it out if we can. Physical abuse can include things like slapping, hitting, beating, bruising. Again, some of those things that are very easy to see, but it can also be things like confining them against their will, locking them in a room, tying them to furniture. We'll talk about restraints here in just a second too. Some of the indicators, bruising. And when we see bruising, sometimes the populations that we serve bruise easy just based off of age, based off of other health conditions. So bruising can be difficult too, but a lot of times you can look at bruising and go, this isn't, they just bumped their arm on a wall. For example, if somebody were to tell you they fell and they have bruises on the inside of their arms, it's pretty difficult to get a bruise on the inside of your arm from a fall. So it may not be that that's what it came from. Might be warranting another question or two. If you see things like fractures that don't have a clear-cut explanation that makes sense, if you see burns. Yeah, and I see your comment there, and absolutely. There is that culture of silence and shame, and we'll talk about that here a little bit too, because people get really embarrassed to talk about things, and other people have told them not to in some cases as well. Other types of physical abuse can also fall into the medication of the force feeding or restraints. When I say restraints, I would guess that the majority of people are thinking about things going around people's wrists and their ankles being tied down like that. But restraining can come in different forms as well. I know many of you are working in long-term care, working in facilities, working in places that you've seen a lot of different things over the years. Are any of you familiar with the term saddle sheet restraints? That's one that doesn't really get used too much anymore around, but it used to be a pretty common practice. And they would take a sheet and it would go over the back of a tray chair and through the bottom of it, and then people would get tied in through that. And you're not going to see the bruising in the typical spots from that if somebody were tied in with it being around their waist area and their shoulders. It's not what we typically think of when we say the words restraints now. So there's other ways that it could be done that we're not being seen. chemical restraint is absolutely a real one as well. If somebody's being over medicated or over tranquilized, yeah, absolutely. When it comes to emotional abuse, we're looking at things that cause emotional pain, that distress or the anguish, the yelling, the insults, the harm. If we talk to APS workers, which are our adult protective services, we talk to them and ask them questions about this emotional abuse. And we've asked this question across the country. One of the things that they'll tell us that's pretty common is their clients say that they'd rather be physically abused than emotionally abused, because that physical pain is going to go away quicker than that emotional stress that they've been caused, and it hurts them more. And so I point that out because a lot of times people think, well, that whole sticks and stones may break my bones comment, but again, that emotional abuse can be just as detrimental, if not more so, in a lot of cases. So some signs to look for here, and these can sometimes be missed quite often with the emotional abuse. Somebody has hypertension. Many of our clientele have hypertension, but is it caused from some of the emotional abuse and the stress that's coming from that? Are they having significant weight loss or gain? Do they feel dizzy? Are they not sleeping the way that they should? Are they having more moments of confusion? Do they seem to be upset more often than they used to? Do they cower away from certain people or certain authority figures? Are they reporting being verbally abused and people aren't taking them serious based off of maybe other health conditions, or if they have a neurocognitive disorder or something that makes it harder for people to get their reports out in some cases? With neglect takes that form of people not providing support to others. So if that whether be a physical, emotional, or social need, depending upon their primary care, it can take the form of withholding food, medications, access to professionals. It can take on many forms, and it can also take on the form of someone becoming a caregiver. And once that person's now in a long-term care facility, a nursing home, they're in a hospital, they've got some kind of in-home services set up, whatever it may be, and then they just stop checking on them. They just kind of leave them to their own devices and not following up with, do they need more care? Are they making sure that their needs are being met? Some indicators of neglect here. And again, some of these can be a little bit confusing too, whether it's caregiver neglect or if it's self-neglect. Is their living environment safe? Do they have adequate nutrition or hydration? How do you distinguish understaffed facilities not providing? Could you give me a little more clarification on what you're asking there, on Alice? And I'll keep going while you put your stuff in there. When we look at skin breakdown, I'm sure you guys are aware of skin breakdown and what that looks like and what that means, and knowing that it doesn't just happen instantly. It does take some time for that to happen. And so if we see something that's pretty severe, that could be a sign that somebody's been neglecting them for quite some time. Do they have the correct amount of social and emotional support that they need? What kind of clothing and personal hygiene do they have? Have they been abandoned? And sometimes with our population that we serve, the 18 to 59 with disabilities and 60 and above, we do sometimes see abandonment, just like you would with a child or an infant being abandoned. They've been dropped off in places and just left there. And then somebody who may have dementia or a neurocognitive disorder who is being left unsupervised. Yeah, Alice, I would say if you have facilities who are not giving people the medications that they're supposed to, things like that, that'd be something I would make a report on so that somebody could follow up with it, whether that be with our adult protective services or maybe even with our division of regulation and licensure even. So I would definitely make a report. Isolation. Isolation can be something that's a little confusing as well. On the surface, isolation looks very simple when you say somebody's been left all alone, almost to that whole abandonment piece too. But restricting somebody from family or friends, restricting them from having telephone or mail correspondence. But it can go so far as to say that if somebody has a caregiver or somebody who is supposed to be taking care of them or overseeing their level of care, but they're not giving them any kind of social support or stimulation, then that still falls under isolation. That puts them at a much higher risk also for neglect, abuse, or that exploitation. If somebody has a disability, Isolation can look like withholding assisted devices, not letting them have their hearing aids or not allowing them to get hearing aids if they need them. Phone services for the deaf or hard of hearing, and glasses, walkers, things along those lines can all fall under the definition of isolation if they're being withheld from somebody. One of the good news things here is that if you can break isolation for somebody who's had that kind of put on them, you've actually just put in place one of the most effective ways to counteract that abuse that's happening or prevent abuse from happening. So when they're isolated, that's when the abuse is much higher risk for taking place. Some things to look for here with isolation. Do they seem fearful? Do they have higher levels of anxiety or agitation? Do they seem like they are isolating or withdrawing themselves? If they're not responding, if they seem ambivalent or just kind of ho-hum to their whole situation, like what's it really matter? If they make contradictory statements, that's always a sign for us to think that something might be going on. If you ask them questions and they don't want to talk openly about it, is there a reason for it? And do they have confusion or disorientation to their circumstances? Let's talk about financial and material exploitation. Do you guys see that in the areas that you are working? People being exploited. I know many of you are working in long-term care, the different facilities, and you may see in some cases where you have a client who their bills were paid for a while and now their bills aren't being paid. That's a red flag right off the bat. Why isn't the money being filtered through the right way anymore? Where is it going? That's one that we get quite often. We can follow up with that. We can check on bank records and see what's going on. But the definition here, just real quick: misuse, mishandling, exploitation of property, possessions, or assets of adults. Could use their assets without consent, under false pretense, or through coercion or manipulation. Let me give you a scenario, and you tell me if it is exploitation or not. Let's say grandma has a grandson, comes to see her and says, "Grandma, can I borrow $1,000? Grandma says, "Sure, here you go." Comes back a few days later and says, "Grandma, can I borrow $3,000? And she says, "What for?" And he says, I need to pay some stuff." And she says, "Well, sure, here you go." A couple of days later, another grandson comes by and grandma says, "Did you know your cousin's been here and borrowed $4,000 this week?" And that other grandson says, "For what? You know he ain't getting anything that he should be getting with that. He is out there buying drugs. He is doing something he shouldn't with it. I know he is. Don't be giving him money." Is that exploitation? I see already one in there saying yes. Is grandma being exploited? Let me give you another level to this scenario. Grandma has full capacity. She is her own person. She has autonomy. And he's greedy. So, same question. Is she being exploited? Because grandmas don't say no. Yeah. In this case, no, it's not actually exploitation as I put it out there. And this is one that is really, really common. And we get these reports a lot, and it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good on the surface, because you, as this caring person in somebody's life, whether that be professionally or personally, you see this happening and you know that that person is not doing something good with that money. And so you say, "Grandma, stop giving them money." You got to say no. Grandma can say, "Well, I'd give you the money if you asked for it too." If you have full capacity and you are your own person, you can do whatever you want to with your life. And so as we go through some more of this stuff here, I'll start to point out. So in this case, there was no false pretense. He never said what he was or wasn't doing with it. She just said, "For what?" And he said, "I got to pay some stuff." Now, you could, if you could verify that there was some kind of undue influence or coercion in that, then yeah, we absolutely could do something with it. If she's scared, then yeah, absolutely, there's something we could do with that too. So yeah, there's always the what ifs that we could add to that. I just wanted to give you the higher level version of it that happens day in and day out. You can do what you want to with your stuff. And it's tough. And it's tough as you guys make a report in to go, well, I know they're not doing something good with it. But just like you have the right to loan your friends money if you want to, even if they're not going to ever pay you back or not loan them money. It's your choice. So there's a lot of scenarios that don't look good, but doesn't always mean we can do something. So let me ask another question, since we've kind of broached the subject of making these reports and it not feeling good sometimes. Those of you that said, yes, you have made a report, how many of you wished that you'd have had some kind of follow-up that said, hey, here's what the outcome was, here's what's going on, here's what we're doing, all that good stuff? Along those same lines, you've also seen that same person that you made a report for afterwards, and you're like, nothing has changed. Why aren't they getting help? Why aren't they living somewhere else? Why aren't they removing this abuser from their lives? Why aren't they doing these things? Well, I alluded to somebody having that right to autonomy and that they have that right to self-determination, just like you and I do. And so part of the thing with APS is that they could show up to that person's house and they say, yeah, I'm aware. I don't care. I don't want to talk to you. They could just straight up say, I don't want to talk to you. And we have to basically leave them be because they have that right to refuse our services. And you worked for CPS and you never even found out the outcome. Yeah. So they have the right to privacy and confidentiality as well. And so you, as a mandated reporter, you're mandated to make that report. And you've done your due diligence then. You've done your job. And by doing your job, you want to know that somebody else is doing their job. But at that point, for somebody else to do their job, they have to respect the rights of those clients, which is that confidentiality. Now, you may get a follow-up call to say, hey, I've got the case. Can you tell me any more about it? But then they won't give you feedback along the way to say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what's going on afterwards. Here's the outcome. Because you did your due diligence as a mandated reporter, and you can say, I did my job, and you can feel good about it, even if we don't see the things that we want to have actually done with that client. So I do want you guys to keep that in mind on what APS can and can't do, and we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of this. Some of the indicators of exploitation, though, that I do want you guys to watch for and definitely make those reports for. And even if you have that scenario like I shared where grandma gave out money, if it makes you feel uneasy, go ahead and make that report. Let somebody else check into it because there very well could be something there for it. If there's any kind of unusual activity or a lack of amenities, if their situation doesn't match up with their estate or history, if they don't understand or recognize where their money's going or how much they have coming in, that's a red flag. If there's been changes in their purchases, they used to buy this much every month, now all of a sudden they're buying a whole lot more of whatever it may be. Where's that extra money going to? What's it going towards? And if they've had an address change or where the checks that they are receiving has been going someplace else, that's a big red flag too. If you are in a situation where you can see somebody's signatures that they have to sign for things like care or services or anything like that, and somebody has been put on a list to say they're an authorized person, that's a red flag if it's new, or if you see signatures that don't match up. Yeah, absolutely. Your job is not to determine if the report is truthful or not truthful. Absolutely. Yeah. Your job is to make that report and let somebody else follow up on it. And that's exactly what we ask for you to do. And I want you guys to know that if you do that, you can rest assured that we'll do our best to do a prompt and thorough investigation. And that you have done your best by making that report so somebody could do that. Other things to look for: people are missing belongings, things are being stolen. If they can't explain where their money's going, where their things have gone to, those are all things to kind of keep in mind for it might warrant a report to us. And again, if you're ever not sure, go ahead and make that report or give us a call and we'll walk you through some of those processes with things that we might need to see a little bit more of to know if we do. For abandonment, basically, we talked about this earlier, where somebody might be left all alone. They've been deserted someplace. They've been taken to a nursing home or a hospital or some facility, and they've been dropped off and left. It could also be that somebody has been deserted at a home. They had somebody who was caring for them, living with them, and that person has just up and moved out and left them all alone there. That also falls under abandonment. Sexual abuse is one that is severely underreported. And a lot of times things get missed on this one as well because of people's situations. But sexual abuse does include physical force. There's threats, coercion to facilitate non-consensual touching, fondling, intercourse, or other sexual activities. I do want to point out that it's true, especially for people who don't have the right to give consent or comprehend. So if somebody has a guardian, that alone right there might be enough to say that if there's any kind of sexual relations happening, they may not have had that ability to make that consent. Yeah, and sadly, a lot of times we only hear about these cases when they make the news. That is sad. Yep. Hopefully we can get to them before they make it to that point, but not always. So yeah, if you guys can help us with that. If you're seeing things that rise to that level to make you suspicious of it, make that report for us. Some of those signs and symptoms. There's physical signs that we can look for. What if in a nursing home, two people without capacity have relations? That'd be a question I would raise with that facility, and to talk about, do they have guardians? Do they have somebody who's kind of in charge of their decision making, and what that says specifically, because it can all be different from person to person. Could be a big no-no there. Could be something that it's not as much so. So I would start with that facility and with those individual clientele to see. It does say a lot about supervision too. Yeah, absolutely. Some of the psychosocial symptoms, some of the things that I'm talking about there, I want you to be looking at things like anxiety, agitation, if they have signs of like PTSD, if they're trying to get away, they're trying to run away from wherever they're at, they're fleeing. If they seem like they have had fear that they didn't have before, or depression that they didn't have before, there's a good sign there too. If you have people telling that something's happening, take it serious, take every report serious of this. If they're giving you hints, and this is really tough, especially in dementia cases. And Amelia, I believe in yours, you said that you work with dementia and do training on that stuff. So we should definitely talk sometime. But yes, absolutely can be tough with dementia cases. I'm going to try to give you guys a couple things to watch for with these. So whether it be something with dementia or neurocognition, or whether that be somebody who is nonverbal, and not able to really get their point across, I'll tell you some things to look out for on this one, because it can be easy to overlook them and say it's something else, and they very well could be getting abused, whether it be physically, sexually, or emotionally. If you have somebody who may be a quote unquote alleged perpetrator, and that person seems very suspicious at times, that's something that raises awareness for us. Why are they being suspicious, especially if that person is trying to tell you about things that are happening with them? So let's talk about some of those indicators. Now, some of these have a asterisk on them. So those are ones that are like pretty severe ones. Let's keep an eye out for this. Why is this kind of stuff happening? But let's talk about some of the behavioral. If they have direct or coded disclosure of sexual abuse, they're telling you about it. They're showing you that it happened. They're showing you the bruising. They're showing you the things that are happening there. If they get really upset when they have to be changed or bathed, and that wasn't something that was normal, what's going on? Why are they now afraid, or why are they upset to have this done? If they're showing poor hygiene, and poor hygiene can come out in several different reasons. Part of the abuse itself could be a reaction to it. Maybe they are using that as a coping mechanism or a safety mechanism to combat the trauma and try to regain some kind of sense of control. So if they can make themselves to where they aren't appealing to the abuser anymore, and the abuser leaves them alone, they're going to continue to do that because that's their safety mechanism right now. That's their coping mechanism. If they start sexually acting out towards themselves or others, it could be a sign that that's a learned behavior. It could be a sign that they're trying to do it before it gets to them. It could be all kinds of different things there. For the physical, you can look at things like frequent or unexplainable physical illness or complaints. If they have UTIs, and how many of our clientele have UTIs quite often, and they may not be able to tell you why they're getting a UTI. Maybe this is part of it. Pregnancy is you can't deny that one. And if there's an STD, you can't deny that either. There's something going on. Now let's talk about some of those things where they're like nonverbal, where they have things that aren't necessarily just so obvious on the surface that you're going to know it for certain. If they're nonverbal or they can't bring themselves to even talk about it. Maybe they are verbal, but they just don't want to talk about it. They might regress. They might act out. So you might start seeing more physical behaviors where they're trying to be combative. We call them combative. We call them all kinds of different things, and we don't understand why they're being that way. It could be because of sexual abuse. They may sexually act out, like we said here earlier. They may also complain about real or imagined physical illnesses, and they might associate those with the areas where they were assaulted. So somebody might be talking about having stomach pain, stomach issues, having problems going to the bathroom. They might be talking about having sore throats. They might be talking about this fear that they're going to soil themselves, and on and on. And those are kinds of things that we want to watch for and make sure that those don't have underlying causes. I will tell you that this is a tough subject to talk about. People don't like to ask questions that are really hard. But I can tell you from experience, working in hospitals myself, sometimes you have to ask the question extremely bluntly. And we've had people that we've asked, have you had sexual abuse? And the person said no. And even though we've had multiple reports of this person it's been seen, it's been reported, everybody thinks it's happening, all these different things, and they say no. And it took somebody one day to say, you know what, let me ask them another question. And they said, did somebody put their penis in your mouth? And they said, yes. They weren't asking the question the way that they thought they should ask it. They didn't feel like that was a form of sexual abuse. So it was something else. So sometimes you have to ask those very, very direct and pointed questions, or you might not get the answers. So tough subject, but absolutely, if you have any kind of concerns, make that report. Because again, that's one of those that is severely underreported in this population. And sometimes it's just from lack of awareness, lack of belief that it could even happen. So a lot of that stuff has nothing to do with people thinking that they're desirable or whatever. It's a lot of times is a control method. So if you see anything that raises those flags, please make that report for us. For self-neglect, I'll tell you that in our world here with APS, self-neglect is the number one type of case that we investigate. And that involves somebody who's not meeting their own essential needs. If they don't have enough food, clothing, shelter, it's wintertime. So it's getting down below freezing. And anytime it's down below freezing, if somebody doesn't have utilities, we're going to get reports. We're going to go check on them. Now, I do want you to know that doesn't mean there's anything that we can do sometimes, because if that person has full capacity and the right to make their decisions, they could say, I'm doing just fine on my own. We're going to give them resources. We're going to offer the help that we can. But if they don't want the help, we can't force them to do anything. Here in Missouri, there are plenty of places still that have no electricity and no running water or plumbing. And that's how they've lived their life from generation to generation. And it's okay for them. It may not be how we choose to live, but that's been okay for them. And that's how they choose to live. And so we also have to weigh out what's good for them, what's good for us, because what's good for us isn't always good for them. And is it okay for them to have a difference of opinion? And a lot of times that answer is going to be yes, because we want them to have that right to make their own choices, provided it's not going to cause harm to them or others. And again, a lot of it comes back to autonomy. So if you ever have concerns or wonder more about self-neglect and you want a lot more on that, you can go to NAPSA now and you can get a whole bunch of information there on that one too. But some of our indicators here, if they're not going to their medical appointments, and I'll be 100% honest, I've avoided or tried to not go to the doctor myself. That doesn't mean somebody's going to make a report on me, but sometimes that's an indicator that somebody's not taking care of themselves the right way. And so you may have concern, and you can make that report and we'll come in and check it out. Other things that we might see, we see things like lack of medical care, homes that are not in good repair. We see hoarding, we see poor hygiene, we see squalor, malnutrition, avoiding social contact, not being dressed appropriately for the weather. And all of those can have other causes besides just what they are on the surface. We talked about trauma just a little bit ago. I'm a huge trauma-informed advocate for that kind of stuff and looking at why things may be happening. If you have people who are living in a hoarding type situation, there could be mental health issues. It could be that it's a trauma response. All of these could actually be a trauma response in one way or form. So what's the underlying cause? And I'm not asking you guys to figure that out before you give us a call. If you have things like this that raise concern for you, you give us that call and we'll try to follow up with them and see what we can do to help. Polyvictimization. What this means basically is that a person who's age 60 or above is harmed through multiple co-occurring or sequential types of abuse. There's oftentimes one or more type perpetrators. So if you guys do see one of these things that we've already talked about, take a look around. You might see more. You might have even more to report for us. And if you don't, we're going to be looking anyway. And we're going to look to see what else is going on, because more often than not, if there's one form of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, there's probably another, especially if that person's at high risk. The impact here for that, again, it comes down to a lot of the trauma. It shatters their sense of safety and overwhelms their ability to adapt. It's cumulative. So no two people are going to experience trauma the same way or the same way each time that it may happen. And so what we may say is not so bad, somebody else may say is the worst thing that ever had happen, and vice versa. It's not our jobs to judge them on that. Our job is not to say, okay, well, it could have been much worse. Our job is to try to just help them in that moment and mitigate the risk that's already there. And in some cases, we can't change what has happened, but we can try to prevent it from happening in the future. That's one of the things with some of the scams. You guys are familiar with, there's a lot of different scams that target the elderly and the disabled population out there, I'm sure. And I'm sure that you've probably come across a few in your time working, or maybe you've even seen it firsthand. When those scams happen that are either internet or phone scams, what do you think the odds are that the person behind that phone or computer is sitting just down the street? Or do you think it's more likely that they're in another state or even another country? More often than not, they're not going to be just right down the street when it's one of those kinds of things. So with that being said, it's really hard to get the restitution for that. And so in some cases, if we can, we'll absolutely try to do that. We'll work a case up to where maybe we can get a prosecution out of it and try to get some restitution on it, or get some compensation. But sometimes there's just no way, because they're not even in this country. And in those cases, it becomes about prevention for the future. So we try to find a way to help them recognize what is and what isn't a scam. You guys, I'll be honest, with scams, there's so many different ways this happens. And some of them are in person. We have bad weather comes around. We have a hailstorm. You have people that drive up and down roads saying they're going to put a roof on. They sometimes scam people as well. They take some of the money and they run. So there's all kinds of different ways that this comes across. But I'll tell you also that there are times that, let's use a phone call, for example. A person is called and asked for money over the phone, and they call them every week. When we get to them and we say, this is a scam, this is what they're doing, that person says, I know. And so then we follow it up with, you know that they're taking your money and scamming you? And they're like, yeah, I know, 100% I know. But you know what? I'd gladly pay for that phone call, because nobody else comes to see me. Nobody else spends any time with me. So I will gladly pay for that time that they're willing to spend with me and talk for that little bit of time. That breaks my heart when I hear that. It breaks my heart that somebody is willing to go through that just to have that social interaction. So I applaud all of you for being here today and wanting to learn more about this. And I also applaud all of you for what you do for a living, because you're helping to mitigate that kind of stuff right now. People desire interaction with others. And so often, if we can give them that interaction, that good interaction that is appropriate, a lot of times that mitigates a lot of the abuse, neglect, and exploitation that could happen by having somebody who's willing to be there in their life in an appropriate way. Yeah, especially in the pandemic, there was a lot of loneliness there. Absolutely. And people exploited that to no end. So I want to give you guys a little bit here at the end, and then let you have some time to ask some questions if you have them. Some of our guiding values is we have to balance their protection and their safety to their right to self-determination. And any time that we have to weigh it out, their right to self-determination wins. As a person who has that autonomy, you have that right to make poor choices, whether we think they're good or not. What I tell my staff here is, if they've tried to help somebody and they've done the best that they can, I want them to hold their head up high at the end of the day when they go home, saying, I tried my best, knowing that that person may still be in a very bad situation. So the same thing applies to you. if you're seeing this and you say, oh my gosh, I need to make a report, I want you to hold your head high knowing that you did your part. You did your part as a mandated reporter or as a caring person in somebody's life to say, I want to get them help, or at least want to try. We can't force people sometimes to have that help. And so hold your head high, make those reports, let us try. Our principals, they have the right to be safe. They have the right to make decisions that don't conform with societal norms, as long as they don't harm other people. They have the right to accept or refuse our services, and they retain all their civil and constitutional rights unless a court says otherwise. Let me tell you a little bit about what we can do. We can provide protective services. We can go in, if they're willing, and try to help them get things set up in place that helps mitigate future abuse, neglect, exploitation, try to help them get some services in their home. We can intervene when they're incapacitated and they need medical and mental intervention. And we can intervene on the behalf of somebody who's incapacitated to identify a representative or a legal guardian or even legal interventions. What we cannot do is we can never force somebody to accept our services if they have capacity. We can never remove somebody from their home involuntarily. And I know that's one that is very, it's a big misconception out in the community. People think that we can go in and just remove somebody from their home, and we can't. And under no circumstances can we remove somebody. We cannot provide services for what there's no services for. We can't just make stuff up. We can't enforce the law, and we cannot reveal the identity of the reporter. So again, if you guys make a report, you can rest assured that we're never going to tell somebody who made that report. And we can't transport anybody under any circumstances either. Anybody surprised by any of those? Were any of those new for you? No? Okay, good. And I'm going to leave this slide up instead of the question slide so that if you guys want to, and you want to write down these websites, write down this phone number, you'll have them up here. But we've got about 10 minutes. I'm willing to accept any questions that you guys might have. I'll have to ask Shelby to answer that one. Or will they be getting the slides, Shelby?
Yeah, I will be sending the slides as well as the YouTube link at the end, or sometime this week, probably.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome, Chen. What are our cooperating and coordinating agencies? You mean, who do we work with quite often? Quite often we will work with any other state agency that might be involved in somebody's life. We are setting up as many MDTs as we possibly can, those multidisciplinary teams where we involve law enforcement, we involve community mental health, we involve whoever we possibly can for that stuff. And a lot of it does depend on your community, who those cooperating and coordinating agencies are. The same info for the state of Illinois. If you go to napsanow.org right here on this bottom one, they'll give you a lot of that information. A lot of the abuse, neglect, exploitation stuff is going to be very, very similar. Illinois does have a little bit difference on some of the other stuff in their statute, though. Can I provide leads for obtaining power of attorney? I would probably refer you to something local. Somebody who might be local more in your area for that one. Or if you reach out to us, we can probably try to point you in the direction too. If making a report, what type of evidence and documentation required by a family member? If you just make a report, they will ask you the questions that they need to ask over the phone. And if you have the information they need, they'll make that report for somebody to come out and check, and you won't have to provide evidence or documentation right off the bat for a lot of stuff. You just have to have that concern for us. And I would say that it sounds like you guys might benefit from some like secondary trauma training. And if you want to reach out, we can talk more about that. And I believe you guys will get my contact information with this as well. It may actually be not on these slides. Sorry.
Coming up.
Thank
Once
you.
I share my screen again.
All right. You want me to stop sharing?
If you don't mind. But definitely, if there's any more questions, keep sending them in. Let's see. All right. So as you see there, we've got Robin's email, robin.pendleton@health.mo.gov, in case there are any more questions that you might not want to ask here. And of course, I want to say thank you so much to Robin for being here today and speaking with us on this very important topic, as well as thank you to you all for being here as well. And just a few more things from me. Of course, there will be a survey at the end that we can use for our upcoming education programming. So I want to encourage you all to complete that. It'll pop up on your screen once we end the webinar today. And again, I will send the link as well as the slides to all participants today, or all participants from today. I will send that sometime this week. And finally, I want to say one more thank you to our education sponsors, as their support allows us to fulfill a vital part of our mission, which is educating and empowering individuals as well as their loved ones for quality living across the continuum of long-term care. As we look to the new year, we're really excited. We've got new partnerships, new presentations, new webinars, all coming up soon. So you will receive information by email, as well as if you just would keep a lookout on our website for our upcoming education events. They will be coming out in the coming weeks. And one last thing is, if you would like to be a part of the magic here, sponsorship might be a great way to do that. So if you can contact Vera Jones, our Director of Development, 314-919-2405. That's her phone number on the screen. Or her email is vjones@voicestl.org. So once again, I will say thank you to you all, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you, Robin.